What have you witnessed someone do that made you realize that they were really, really smart? My wife's grandfather. He's a retired electrical engineer with a dozen patents to his name, and a long list of recognitions that I can't be bothered to remember. I always knew he was brilliant, but never realized just how much. Until one day last year, we were visiting, and he got a phone call. Keep in mind, he's been retired for 20 years and is 86 years old. The phone call was from an electrical engineering firm from halfway across the globe, asking if they could fly him out to a site and have him consult on the energy capture of a hydroelectric dam. They'd run into a problem that none of their own electrical engineers could solve. They'd consulted 3 of the top related university departments in the US on the issue, and the last one had referred them to my grandfather. 20 minutes on the phone, and he agreed to think about it. 2 days later, he had solved their issue and written the solution on a single 8x11 sheet of paper, which he scanned and emailed to the company. He said he took so long to write it because he didn't want to have to fly all the way there at his age. His explanation was so clear that I was able to understand and follow it with no relevant higher education. One time, my drunk uncle was in jail and needed bail money. And being that my dad was the only one in the family with any real savings, they all looked to him to fork up 100% of the cash. Having been asked, my dad realized the situation had 2 possible outcomes. 1, pay for the bail and never get the money back. 2, not pay for the bail and the whole family would blame him for it. So, my dad decided to throw them a curveball. He told them that whatever the rest of the family raised for the bail, he would not only match it, but he'd offer double whatever they raised together. Nobody offered 1 cent. Blame averted. My older brother was always terrible at school. I can remember him straight up asking why he needed to graduate high school and then again in college. He then accepted a low-level job after graduation in marketing that ultimately fell apart due to the company executives screwing up big time. During all of it, he somehow was able to keep a small client, and within 7 months of working was promoted to their executive marketing director, making 6 figures. Now he has multiple clients on the side and is always scheming something up. Dude is as hard-headed as they come, but nonetheless a damn marketing genius. Blows my mind how far he's come. I was once in Chinatown, and I saw this older fellow with a bunch of groceries. He had tied the bags together by the handles and slung them over his shoulders. He looked ridiculous. The next week, I was struggling with a lot of groceries myself, and I remember this elderly fellow. I stopped on the sidewalk, tied all my bags together, and walked home like the unencumbered dork I became that day. Not a person, but my parents' old dog. My mom would get bones from the butcher shop for their dog, and they were long enough that the dog couldn't get all the marrow out of the center. The dog figured out that only my stepdad's truck was heavy enough to break the bones after experimenting with other vehicles at the house. There was eventually a bone in the same spot on the driveway every time that I came home. That is actually a genius dog. In high school, I had a friend who we made fun of all the time for being dumb. But he would have the wackiest ideas that would somehow work. One time, around Christmas of my sophomore year, a few of us decided to buy a 30-pack, and then later decided we didn't feel like drinking it that night. I couldn't keep it at my house, but one of my buddy's friend's parents was coming to pick all my buddies up. Nobody knew how they were going to get the 30-pack out of the house and to one of their houses. Then my friend came up with a genius idea. He went upstairs and wrapped the 30-pack in wrapping paper. He then proceeded to carry it right out to the car with our friend's mom waiting and say it was a gift for his girlfriend who he was going to be seeing later that night. I realized that not being great at school doesn't mean someone isn't ingenious. I knew 2 guys in undergraduate who would play mental chess. As they'd passed in the hall, one guy would say, "Knight to Queen 3, or something along those lines. The other guy would roll back his eyes for a second and then nod to acknowledge the move. Both guys then just kept walking, in opposite directions. Later that day, when they passed again, the second guy would declare his counter move. A game could last days, and they never forgot where any of the pieces were. Each had a mental image of the board. Sure, they might have been faking, but these guys were always first and second on the Dean's Honor List for all 4 years of my undergraduate. I knew them pretty well, and I think the mental chess was legit. Sitting in my best friend's apartment on the East Coast in the mid-1980s, he's working on some code on a prototype Unix workstation he'd been given. He runs his program and it produces an answer, then runs it again and produces a different answer. He thinks about it for a minute and pronounces that the CPU is broken. Right, the CPU is broken. Never heard that one before. He went through 3 or 4 scenarios, then he pulled out the machine-level debugger and started stepping through the code. He said, look, right here, the flags weren't updated right in this instruction. He sends an email on the newly developed internet to the company that supplied the workstation. He got a response the next day that said, oh, you have that CPU. Okay, we verified your issue and we will put our replacement in the mail promptly. His CPU was indeed broken. 30 minutes from diagnosis to request to repair. I was at my desk waiting to make a purchase over the phone. I mentioned to a coworker that I always have to pull out my credit card and that you'd think I'd have it memorized by now. Another coworker overheard that and said, I know your Visa number, and spit it right out. After I got off the phone, I asked him what the hell, and he said he heard me say it a couple weeks earlier. Once. Numbers just stick with him that way. I already knew he was a bright guy, but that took it up a notch. A kid in my 2nd grade already knew algebra. We learned this because for April Fool's Day that year, our teacher decided that it would be cute to give us a pop quiz. So she went to the 8th grade class and asked for an algebra test, made copies, and handed them out to us. Some of the kids were freaking out, and the teacher assured us that we already went over it. So she left the room, and some of the kids started crying. She came back in after a few minutes and said that it was a joke, but she grabbed the test anyways. This kid scored 18 out of 20. I never saw it myself because I was about 2 years old, but when my older sister was around 4, she used to go grocery shopping with my mom. My sister would keep a running tally of all the items in my mom's cart. As my mom took something off the shelf, my sister would ask the price, and then would add it to the total in her head. If my mom put something back, she would subtract it. My sister was right every time when they got to the checkout. She's a doctor now. My sister also used to read the bedtime stories to my parents when she was around 2 years old. She was a damn genius. Meanwhile, I'm the kid who ate Play-Doh. My dad had a business trip in Seattle that I tagged along for so I could see a soccer match and explore the city. He invited me to go to the research hospital with him one day, and I agreed. They were working on testing some type of cardiovascular tool on a cadaver that they would stimulate blood flow in order to test. Seeing my dad, who didn't go to college, barely graduated from high school, lived on welfare with a single mom growing up, and who knocked up a teenage girl when he was a teenager himself, perform surgery on a cadaver using a tool he invented that could potentially save thousands of lives, blew my mind. He had hundreds of patents on devices. I got surgery 3 years ago, and my shoulder surgeon used a tool he invented in the 90s. He's an incredibly smart and hardworking man who just got the right amount of luck to get him where he is today. I used to work with a physician who had patients' medical record numbers memorized. Not because he was trying, he just saw them once and would keep it. When medical students would ask questions, he would say the page number and paragraph where they could find the answer. He wouldn't use progress notes with patients. He would just walk into the room and ask patients about all their family members by name and then their entire medical history without ever glancing at a note. He would write notes 6 weeks after seeing a patient and never miss a beat, although the pharmaceutical billing departments would scream about it constantly. On a side note, he had zero knowledge of the real world or social skills, but his memory was the craziest I've ever seen. Hey, you've got to respect a man who's dedicated to his craft. When my dad decided to add an extra addition to the house, he'd be out there for 70, 80 hours a week, adding 3 extra floors to the house with running water up to the 3rd floor. He would rent excavators and large moving equipment and only had like 3 or 4 times that he hired an extra hand. It was amazing to watch. He had 3 months off work and damn did he make use of it. Our house literally doubled in size during that time period. My wife is smart, like 6 languages fluently smart, without breaking a sweat. Has never not done well in school. Always gets promoted, but no one in my family saw this because she's an introvert and tries to keep herself dumb so people get her and like her. My family and I are smart. She's next level smart. So, after we got engaged, family had a get-together. As in cousins, friends, lots of people. As usual, we played some group games. She was reluctant, but I pulled her aside and asked her to try and fit in. She obliged, but was annoyed with me. We started with Pictionary. She schooled the room. Moved to a bunch of single-deck card games. Counted cards. Knew everyone's decks. The whole 9 yards. Quiz board games. She knew all the answers. Over and over again, she was dominant to the point of silencing the family. It was unnerving, even for me. A few weeks later, when we visited her family, they said, "Oh, we don't play games with her. She plays to decimate the competition." I found out my 12-year-old little brother has a legitimate photographic memory. He's a big Lord of the Rings fan, and knows an abnormal amount about the series. Whenever he answers questions about it, he looks up and squints a bit off into the distance. I asked him about that, and it turns out that he's actually reading from the book in his head. He can even jump to random page numbers. He also knows a ridiculous amount of world history. I go to him when I need help with that. Sadly, he's adopted, and we don't share the same genes. Growing up, your dad is always that nut. At least, mine was. I always thought of him as a joker who liked to invent stuff around the house. But long story short, when I was around 12, he made a basic hydrogen engine. He was on track to make it practical for his van, and was so stoked, claiming he would get 4 to 5 more miles per gallon. He was able to make a small hydrogen cell and a housing for it and set it in his van. It was so complicated, I can't even explain it properly. He did manage to get 3 to 4 extra miles per gallon, so his prediction was pretty close. He was then stuck on how to get more out of it, make it cheaper, and potentially pitch his idea to get it on the market. One day he was Googling new ideas and came across an Aussie university that basically did the same thing before him. I don't know the details, but it crushed him. He stopped working on it and kinda stopped making stuff. A few years ago, I was home visiting and was walking through his workshop and found the cell tucked away, all dusty. It dawned on me that I will never come close to being as smart and intuitive as my father. I told him before I left too. My old man cried, I cried. It was great. It's too bad he let the discovery of that university having already made a basic hydrogen engine stop him. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that setbacks are part of the inventing process. But there's almost always a way to make your idea unique enough to patent, or work with the other guy to create a better product together. Hell, I know a guy who invented a new style of anchor, the slide anchor. It's super popular in the States, and I've met lots of people who swear by them. If you have an idea, even if it's just a variation of something that's already out there, which will often be the case, then you should still pursue it, because you never know where it might go. I hope that after that last interaction in this story, that this guy's dad is looking back into his invention and seeing how to make it work, because it sounds like it could really be something that would benefit the world immensely. This one's a fun reversal of the question. Not on topic, but I'm going to put it in here anyways. My old roommate George is one of my best friends. He's one of the dumbest people I've ever met. We both ordered Chinese food one night and got the same thing, General Tao chicken, with pork fried rice and an egg roll. We also both got Cokes. We were walking back from the takeout place, pretty happy about eating our food back at the house. We sit at the table, and he opens the bag. His face grows stern as his brows furrow. "Which one is mine?" "What?" "Like, which meal?" he continues as he looked up at me. "Bro, we got the same food, whichever one you want." "I know, but like, which one is mine?" The conversation went on for about 5 more minutes before I just took one of the meals and we watched Adventure Time. A 10-year-old boy living in a village in Burkina Faso built his own ukulele. I would play my ukulele at night for children, and one day he came so excited to show me the ukulele that he built so that he could play with me. He built it with an aluminum can, a wooden board, and got 2 pieces of metal wire to have enough tension that it played a note when plucked. Granted, you could only play the one note, but I was so impressed with him. It made it that much sadder knowing he would never go to school, and that I eventually had to leave the country and leave him behind. But here's a photo we took of that ukulele. My younger brother did really badly at school. He had tutors, aftercare. My mother went absolutely mad with frustration. When he did his finals, he did miserably and didn't get university endorsement, which is basically the stamp of approval that says you're smart enough for university. He went straight to work at a place that he'd done work experience at, and within a year, he was promoted. Highly praised for his work, exceeding expectations. Last year, he was offered and accepted a job to work for Amazon, and he's already been promoted. He and his girlfriend, who was the first girl he ever dated, and who he only met at 21, are moving in together tomorrow. She's going to study in the city they moved to, and frankly, I couldn't be prouder of how this stupid little cockroach brother of mine turned out so amazingly. I find anyone who doesn't engage with overdramatic, argumentative people is usually smarter than they let on. How's the saying go? An idiot will bring you down to their level and win? Smart people just avoid it and know how and when to keep their mouth closed. I'm getting to that point with my dad. He's always argumentative, and I used to fight back and let him get me just as angry as he was. But now I'm so tired of it that I just avoid it. I ask him to stop talking to me. It drives him crazy. But I'm just like, why bother when he just wants to fight? There's no point, and he'll think that he won, no matter what I say or do. When I came upon that realization, I felt like a genius. It genuinely makes my argumentative family members livid when I don't participate. I'm getting better at letting them tire themselves out instead of get to me, and it's great. I also think it's worth noting layers of intelligence, because you can have someone who is cultured, well-versed in a myriad of topics, and highly educated, but who will start arguments with anyone over anything they disagree on, because they put so much stock in how smart they are that they have to be right, and are unwilling to acknowledge other viewpoints because they have so much of their ego tied into their persona of intelligence that they only see their own viewpoint as being the right one, often missing their own biases and rarely questioning their own beliefs and reactions to basic disagreements. For me, this is shown when someone is argumentative by default, rather than discussionary or even debatory, because they would rather dominate someone into submission and feel smart than see why someone thinks about things differently than them and learn from others' experiences. Especially in a world of algorithms, where what you are fed is what you will click on because it affirms your beliefs or rage baits you with the opposite extreme, thereby doing the same thing. Shutting others down before you've even had a chance to hear their side shows ignorance of the fact that you live in a broad world that contains other human beings who you might actually learn from. Put simply, someone who always has to win and attacks others to do so often isn't self-aware enough to realize they might be missing something. When my friend, who was a prodigy at school and everything he does, chose to go to a music college to learn piano jazz, when he could have been a neurosurgeon or an astronaut, I don't know. While I knew he was smart before, that decision made me realize that apart from being good at memorizing stuff, he could also realize that good grades don't mean you can be a doctor or a scientist. They mean you can do whatever you want, prestigious or not, and that he could see what would make him the happiest. In my book, he went from a smart student to one of the greatest minds I've ever talked to. I've never seen a situation my dad couldn't handle. To be fair, he's an engineer and has been for most of his life, so problem solving is kind of his thing. I interned at his job, and he solved a problem I'd had issues with for months in 10 minutes. People always say I'm really smart, but it humbles me when I work with my dad and some of my engineering peers. I love it though. A lot of it is just experience. I've been an engineer for 10 plus years and have gotten to the point where I can recognize solutions quickly and potential pitfalls, mostly because I've screwed them up in the past. Behind every competent 40-year-old is a 20-something who made a lot of mistakes. Alright, now let's jump on into the rapid fire segment for stories too short to make a full entry out of, but too good to leave out. Let's go. I had a teacher in high school that, using both hands, could write a sentence starting from the beginning and end simultaneously. He even split the middle word. A guy who created a machine that could dispense a peanut when a coin was put in, and trained crows to do so. The crows left and brought him a crap ton of loose change. Lazy people are the best at this. I witnessed a kindergartner who couldn't draw straight lines, keep his pencil still, and drag the paper around to draw a triangle. Smart people are better at the emotional control necessary to argue their opinions. They can also adjust their opinion based on new information. The ability to use language in fun and original ways, like making conversation very colorful, fun adjectives, metaphors, etc. A kid I know forgot to write an important formula down on his cheat sheet, and instead just derived the formula himself mid-test. I saw someone land a 360 off a ramp at a cable park, their first day even riding. It may sound like luck to non-riders, but that takes some serious understanding of practical physics. So that's it for today. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed this video. I'm ReddList. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.
Going down.